They are, they are somewhat of elusive. When I use the term common, that doesn't mean they're particularly abundant. That just means that they are here and we'll see them once in a while, but they're elusive in the sense that we don't often see them during the daytime. When we're up and around. Nighttime is generally when I might see them. I've been lucky, if I get out early in the morning or late in the evening, I've been lucky to catch glimpses of them passing through, but a few marginal photographs as they're passing through in the low light. Well, anyway, so this is this to me is one of the best photographs I've seen. This is on a trail camera. A friend of mine, Jenna Pizzaturo, who used to live in Massachusetts, and she's perfected the art of capturing images on trail cams. What she caught here, this is at nighttime. She modified a regular digital SLR camera, so she's not using an out of the box, off the shelf trail camera, and she has auxiliary lighting. So I the technology is beyond me. So this was a beautiful photograph at night of a fisher, and that really shows you the coloration, the variation, or the head and the head's more is lighter and more grizzled, and the shoulders down the back are as well to a certain degree. The tail is pretty dark, almost black. The sides and the underside are fairly dark. I'll pass these around. This is an adult male. That's the size of the fisher's skull. They have a typical configuration, typical weasel configuration, and that's the size of a male. You can tell it's a male by this ridge on the top. It's a sagittal crest that allows for stronger muscles to attach. The females won't have that. The females have a very kind of rudimentary one on the back, and like predators, their eyes are facing the front. Whereas the expression they had us learn in school is that eyes in front, animals that hunt; eyes on the side, animals that hide. So rabbits, deer, so forth, their eyes were looking more to the side, whereas bobcat's a good example, fisher's a good example, right in front. Us, we're predators as well, eyes in front. I'll pass that around. I'll take the lower jaw off. We can pass that around to take a look at that. And this is a male fisher. Probably about the maximum extent that in length that we'll see in Connecticut. We take a measurement from the tip of the nose to the end of the tailbone, which is right about where my thumb is. That's about 40 inches. That's about maximum size that we have in Connecticut. And it has this coloration where it's kind of not quite as blonde on the head, but lighter on the flanks, and then dark on the other side. And they will often have a white patch of varying shape and size on their chest, and then down by their genitals as well. You might have another white patch. And you can identify individuals by the patch. They'll stay the same throughout their life. And so whatever the configuration is, if it's documented, if the animal is captured, there's a photograph taken, you can identify that. It's a male, and looks kind of skinny because they shrink this way. So be a little bit chunkier like that. Okay, I'll pass that around so you can see it. All right. So This is the overall range. We have the historical range is in the green and red as well, overlapping. And the current range is in the red. So they did at one time extend all the way down the Appalachian Mountains into Kentucky, Great Lakes states, down through California. There's patches of them still in Northern California. There are a few populations in Idaho and Montana. The bulk of them are in along Canada, southern Canada, and New England. Just about all of New England, Connecticut included now. As of prior to 1988, we really didn't have a whole lot of fishers in Connecticut, but they've expanded. 1988, the state captured some turkeys, sold them to Maine, and with the resulting monies, then they bought fishers from New Hampshire and Vermont and brought them to Western Connecticut because there were no fishers noted really in Western Massachusetts, so there wasn't any existing population that was going to spread down into Connecticut. Whereas here on the eastern part of the state, east of the Connecticut River, there were. So the fishers that were brought in and introduced were in the northwestern part of the state. The fishers that we have here on the eastern part of the state were natural dispersals from Massachusetts, Quabbin reservoirs. If you look at the map, you can see Quabbin Reservoir all the way down to Connecticut is a pretty contiguous patch of green. So it was easy enough route for them to follow and start populating the eastern part of the state. And interestingly, north of this range and overlapping on the north of the range, current range, we run into another weasel that we don't have here, a marten. You might have heard of martens, pine martens. They're more northerly generally, but they do overlap somewhat at the northern part of the range.
Somebody posted a photograph of a pine marten in a rustic county in northern Maine last month or 2 months ago, and everyone was so excited that there was actually one in Maine and not just Canada.
Yeah, they do. They are.
Okay.
I mean, they'll come down. Oh, that's where I point this thing. It's dangerous. Anyway, yeah, northern Maine up here. There are martens here, and all across here too, as well as farther north. They're related. They're a little bit smaller, and they're much more arboreal than fishers. Fishers, for whatever reason, they're not. There's a variety of factors as to what determines their range. Most of it has to do with habitat and food, what type of food they've adapted to, and it also, interestingly enough, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but that range for farther north coincides pretty much with snowshoe hare and porcupines. Porcupine populations extend pretty much down through the southwest into Arizona and most of the western states. Porcupine is all across this area. We're kind of at the southern limit of porcupines here. There have been sightings of porcupines in Bolton and northern Connecticut. Everybody see that? And the reason I mention that, they overlap the range because in the majority of their range, the more northerly areas, their primary sources of food are snowshoe hares and porcupines. So this talks about home range now. Home range is 3 to 15 square miles with an average of 4 to 8 square miles, which doesn't really mean much because it all depends on the individuals. And it depends on other things, other factors, like they prefer contiguous forest. They don't, generally you won't see them out in fields because they hate being out in fields, too exposed. They like fairly thick woods with a good overstory cover. And some of it has to do with how fragmented the the area is, how many roads, how many farms, how many houses, and so forth. That'll determine their home range. A lot of factors that enter into what the individual's home range would be. Is not. I have seen estimates that suggest that you could have per 5 square miles as far as density, you may have three to maybe 5, no, less than that, 1 to 3. I think 1 to 3 fishers per every 3 square miles. That again is meaningless because that's really density. So that's talking about averages. That doesn't mean that if you're living in an area that encompasses 5 square miles that you're going to see 3 fishers.
If there's one, is there likely to be more than one?
What's that?
If there's one, is there likely to be more than one?
Yeah. Their home range. Males have have home ranges that don't usually overlap other males. So if you have an area and you have a male and his home range is going to be pretty consistent. He's going to stay in that area generally his entire life. And other males in that area, he may live, it's called, what they call it? They call it a convex polygon. It's the shape of his home range. So that's his.
Thank you, that's all.
that's his. Another male in the general neighborhood is going to have another home range adjacent to that, but not overlapping, as opposed to males and females. Male and female home ranges will often overlap, generally will overlap, and that's to their advantage coming mating season, to be in the area where the females are. It's not to anybody's advantage, their advantage to have too many males vying for the number of females that they have. So it's interesting how they work that. They work a system out, and it works. It works for them. And like it says here, males range over a larger area than females. They're looking for, because they're larger, they have a little bit more wherewithal to hunt over a larger area. So they're looking at their larger area, home range area, is primarily for better access to food and better access to females. Females don't need to travel that far. And as it says here, what they like is large tracts of coniferous or mixed hardwood softwood forest, which is what we have in certain areas here in Connecticut. Not everywhere. Some of the best places, I've been tracking fishers over at primarily off of Finley Street, in Manchester. That's part of the water department's property, and they own, I don't know how many thousands of acres it extends from Manchester through Glastonbury, Hebron, thousands of acres, and it's all pretty much unfragmented, and that's the kind of areas that they like, and especially fairly thick stuff, softwoods especially. They like a lot of pines. They do. We're finding in Connecticut they do like swamps. They're not aquatic, but they do like swamps because of the cover that it affords. It's all very thick stuff, and because of their shape, they're long and skinny and low to the ground. They can sneak through a lot of brush that other animals couldn't, and so they'll seek out those types of habitats. That last part of that, containing large trees for denning. Now that can be a limiting factor because we're losing a lot of the old trees that have holes in them. Dead trees that have holes in them that are suitable for them to den, for the females to den and have their offspring.
Do they den down near the ground or higher up?
What's that?
Where in the tree do they den? Like down in the roots or?
No, generally higher up. They can climb unbelievably well, and so they generally have fairly high if they can. I mean, it's right now in Connecticut, it's like beggars can't be choosers because we're running out of trees that meet those conditions, They have a nice big old tree with a big enough hole, big enough den in it. They don't excavate the den. They're leaving that up to pileated woodpeckers and other animals to do the work for them. And we don't have a whole lot of those. So sometimes they might find alternative denning sites, and a lot of those end up being on the ground, unfortunately, because that's really vulnerable, makes the young ones vulnerable. But like I say, beggars can't be choosers. They have to pick and choose whatever works for them. Might be a hollow log on the ground. It might be a rock den as well, which is not their first choice, but something that provides protection. Much like bobcats and coyotes and bears and so forth, like to have some kind of den of some sort. And it's not always their first choice. It's not always the big old trees, big old hollow tree, which is everybody's favorite. And the size, males are 36 to 40 inches, and like I mentioned with the pelt that I passed around, that's a 40-inch male. From the nose to the end of the tailbone. There's still some fur on the end there, but to the end of the tailbone. And that's about as big as they get in Connecticut. I'm sure out west there's some bigger. I'm pretty sure there are a little bit, not a whole lot. They weigh 8 to 14. I don't know why they came up with 14 pounds. That seems like an odd number, but somewhere in that range, 8 to 14, more or less. Whereas the females are 30 to 36 inches, so they're much smaller. And they weigh 4 to 6 pounds, again, much smaller. It's basically half the size. Females are half the size of males. That's what they call sexual dimorphism. And some animals exhibit that. The males are much bigger. And there is an overlap. You can get down, get a 36-inch fisher. From a distance, you might not be able to tell whether it's 36 inches, but it's a fairly large fisher. And sometimes it's hard to tell whether it's a male or female. Other than the fact of that sagittal crest on the top of the males will cause a little bump on the head. That will. This is actually a conservative one. I've seen some that are much bigger, and they'll have a noticeable bump on their head. So if you see them from a distance, females will have a fairly smooth forehead, whereas the males will have a bump on there because of that. And that's for muscle attachment for their jaw, and so they have much larger and stronger muscles. And the coloration talked about dark brown and nearly black. Head and shoulders often lighter in color, with males often having a grizzled appearance. That first image on the leading page, that was a male that had a very light grizzled. This one doesn't. This is a male, but it doesn't really have a grizzled forehead, which it's anybody's guess why not. I would say probably because of age. Might be a factor with that. Okay, reproduction is interesting. Usually they have anywhere between 2 to 4 kits born in March and April, and they're very tiny. On the average, when they're first born, they're about 1 ounce. These tiny little things, and their reproduction is interesting. And they share in common with other weasels, as well as, interestingly, as well as black bears, what's known as delayed implantation. So what that means, the kits are born March or April, usually let's say the end of March. In about 10 days, they're bred again. And that, when they're bred, a blastocyst develops, which takes about 15 days to develop a little tiny cluster of cells. And that does not implant in the uterus until February. So they're bred, say, first part of April, and that little blastocyst is waiting, dormant, and then when it comes time, around February, it'll implant and then start developing into a fetus at that point. Why they use that strategy, I don't know. All weasels do that, and bears do that as well. I'm sure there's a good reason. What it is, I don't know. So basically, fishers are barefoot and pregnant year-round. They, except for about a week to 10 days, they're pregnant. Their active pregnancy doesn't really begin until about February. They have about a 30-day gestation period. And the young are born, they're atrisal, which means that they're not fully developed. Their eyes are still closed. Their ears are still closed. And they just have soft fuzz on them. So they're not naked like some, like squirrels and so forth, but they are close to it. And then they have to grow pretty quickly. As far as most research suggests, only the female feeds and tends to offspring. There has been some anecdotal reports that males might have participated, but generally males, they do their thing and then they're gone. And the females tend to the little ones. And then they're weaned at about 4 months. And then they are sexually mature at 1 year. But females will generally not bear offspring until 2 years of age. A lot of times people wonder how long do they live? Well, that's a good question. In captivity, they've been known to live 10 years. In the wild, probably on the average less than that. 6, 7 years maybe on the average, but they're subjected to diseases, and especially the young are subjected to predation when they're more vulnerable. Once they're out of the den, once they're out of the nest. So it's really hard to tell how long they're going to live. That's like with any animal. That's like I talk about white-tailed deer. Well, yeah, white-tailed deer have been known to live 20 years, but is that typical? No, not at all. Not in the wild, certainly. So move on to their diet. They are what is known as facultative carnivores, which means that they do eat some fruits and mast, beech nuts, things like that. They will eat plant material occasionally. Primarily, their diet is, as it says here, porcupines, squirrels, rabbits, mice, voles, carrion. They'll feed on any carrion, whether it be deer or anything else. They will feed on that. Sometimes if it's a deer carcass providing a lot of food, they'll just camp out near the deer carcass and work off of that, because they get a lot of nutrition for very little work, and birds and frogs as well. And northern part of the range, when you start getting up, we do have snowshoe hare in Connecticut, farther in the northern tier of Connecticut. We do have some, but they're more common farther north, and same thing with porcupines. We do have some porcupines in Connecticut, but they're more common farther north. Those farther north, those are their primary sources of nutrition, or snowshoe hares and porcupines. And they're probably the only, fishers are probably the only animal that can successfully and habitually hunt porcupines. They've developed over however many thousands of years, they developed the ability to do that. Porcupines are a problem for most animals, your pet dog. And same thing, coyotes or bobcats or anything else like that, if they tangle with a porcupine, they end up in sad shape generally. Whereas fishers don't. Fishers will attack the porcupine from the head, where it's vulnerable. And so what they will do is, if the porcupine's on the ground, the fisher will maneuver around and then bite on the head. and they won't get a mouthful of quills that way. And generally, then they can flip them over. Once the porcupine dies, they can flip them over, and then eat the meat and so forth from the belly, which doesn't have quills either. And in a tree, if the porcupine's up a tree, the fisher will get around so he's facing down at the head of the porcupine, attacking from there. Usually what happens is the porcupine falls out of the tree in the process, and the fish is down after him. Porcupines do have defense. If they have a burrow or a den and they go in head first, they're pretty safe because the only thing exposed are their quills. The fisher has to get around to the head side and bite. Most of the kills that they make are biting through the head and the neck, depending on the species. They bite through the head and the neck. They have those very large canine teeth, top and bottom, that do a very, very good job as far as incapacitating their prey animal. That biting on the head is helpful because it eliminates or minimizes the possibility of getting bitten back by whatever animal they attack, coming down from the top, biting on the head. That porcupine was that's out in Barkhampstead. And we do have porcupines. I know people have seen them in Union, Stafford Springs, elsewhere along the northern part of Connecticut. All right, now I talk about what you may or may not see in your backyard. Depending on where you're at, it all depends on how much open area surrounds you. A place I wouldn't bother looking for fisher tracks are like Rose's Farm or Heritage Farm. It's too much open fields. In the woods, down by one of the swamps, maybe there might be some come through. I know I've seen fisher tracks and sign in Warner Swamp, if you know where that is. It's west of Hebron Road. It extends more than a mile down to the, what's that, Hebron? Yeah, down to the Hebron line. There's a long swamp that's owned by the land trust, and I have seen fisher tracks in there. But generally, I'll find them in that whole the water department that Manchester, the land that Manchester owns. That's wonderful habitat for them because it's all pretty contiguous and pretty thick forest through there. So what we have, this is a roadkill. I think that was a female, but that doesn't make any difference as far as the tracks. The two things, looking at, they have 5 toes. That little one right there, that's a right front foot. That little one is equivalent to our thumb. And then it has the 4 other toes. And then it has the metacarpal pad behind it, kind of U-shaped. It does form 4 or 5 separate bumps on there, but it's kind of a U-shaped. On the hind foot, that's a right rear, same thing. That's like our thumb, that little one. And it has the 4 pads are very, very prominent. Metatarsal pads, the 4 metatarsal pads are very prominent on that. You can see the claws on there. They do have retractable claws like cats, but they don't have the sheath like a cat does. But they can retract their claws. One of the things that helps them with porcupines is like squirrels. If you ever notice a squirrel can climb down a tree head down, that's because his hind feet can rotate around almost 180 degrees and hook on with his claws and walk down the tree upside down. Same thing with the fisher. Fisher's hind feet can rotate almost 180 degrees around, so they can walk down head first down the tree. So they can get around in front of a porcupine. They can't turn around on the tree too well without falling off the tree. But they can prod that porcupine down, facing them, coming down. One of the things I want to point out, what I'll talk about later too, it's on the pad. Not you don't see that on these metacarpal pads, but you do see it on the metatarsal pads. There's a little clump of fur on each one of those, and that's the location of a scent gland on both feet, both hind feet, and I'll talk more about that, why that's important in a following slide. But the three gaits that they will generally exhibit are, we have the walk, which is hind feet and front feet. This is an old track in the sense that it was laid down fairly thin cover of snow, and then another snowstorm came in and partially filled it. But you can tell by the pattern, and you can usually see the 5 toes on each one of their feet. And that's when they're just walking. They kind of one foot's always in front of the other when they walk, right, left, and right, left and right on the rear. Then a typical walk, or lope, I should say, is what they call a 3x4. I don't know why they call it 3x4, but that's the term. So what we have is we have both front and rear showing, and this is a pattern that you'll typically see. It'll be in the middle 2 together, and then a rear one a little bit behind, and then another rear one up ahead a little bit. You can see the heel on these. They are what is known as plantigrade, where they walk, which is like us. They have their feet land with the heel, and that's the equivalent of the, in this case, metacarpal pad, the toe pads, and the heel pad. And bears walk like that, raccoons walk like that as well, plantigrade down. Whereas coyotes and bobcats will be up on their toes, and you will see that much. You'll see the metacarpal, metatarsal pads, but their heel is up off the ground. So their whole foot is planted. That's fairly shallow snow. That's fairly fresh and wet enough so you can see the individual toes. You can count the toes. You can see the separate metacarpal or metatarsal pads on there, and as well as the heel, where the heel is. Then we have a 2x2 lope. Usually I call it bounding because this usually happens in deeper snow. And the snow's too deep for them to really do a regular walk or a 3x4 lope. So what they'll do is they'll, like a squirrel, you'll see them jump, land on their front feet, and then they'll bring their hind feet back, and the hind feet will land in the same location. And while that's happening, the front feet are off again. So it's very interesting how precise that ends up working out, because each one of these imprints in that bounding lope, they're all 4 feet, or each one of those, as he's moving through the deeper snow, or if he's in a particular hurry. But deeper snow is almost has to move like that because you really can't walk. They're so low to the ground that they'd end up plowing through the snow, so they just bound. And other animals, a lot of other animals will bound like that. Deer will do that too. You'll see a big depression, and then 6 to 10 feet away, another big depression where deer have done that. Same thing here. There may be as much as 6 feet apart between those. So those are the patterns. Even like on the first one, on the walk, it's really hard to determine what that is. I mean, with experience, you know, okay, that's probably a fisher. With this one, it's pretty easy to tell that's a fisher because everything's pretty much defined. This one is more the pattern of all 4 feet landing and a wide interval in between. I mentioned earlier that one of the animals that you can confuse fisher tracks with is raccoons. With fishers, the toes are separate. There's a space between the toes imprint and the pad imprint. Whereas raccoons, they have 5 toes. It looks like you see a raccoon, you see them a lot of times in swampy areas, you see the tracks, and it looks like some little person's hand is put down. You'll see the whole thing with long sausage-like fingers that attach to, or usually are connected to, the pad in the print, whereas these are separate. So when you have a track like this, with the 5 toe pads separate from the metacarpal or metatarsal pad, that's, depending on where you're at, that's a weasel, for one. The size will determine what type of weasel, and the location as well. Otters have very similar tracks. The difference between otters and fishers is otters have webs between their toes. And sometimes, if the conditions are good, you can actually see the web in the track. It'll look kind of, they move like a fisher. Their feet are similar to a fisher, except for that little web. You'll see the connection on that. So now you're all experts as far as it takes a little while. There's so many different factors. You got to go through a checklist. Okay, I see a certain pattern, a certain typical pattern. This is a very, very typical weasel pattern. And then the size and location will narrow that down. This was out in the woods, far from any water, no signs of any webbing on the feet. So in Connecticut, that would narrow it down to probably a fisher. Farther north, where they're overlapping with martins, well, then it gets harder to tell because they have very similar movement patterns and very similar feet, size feet. Fishers have pretty big feet. They have that may be in the center. There may be on that. That's a male fisher, maybe 4 inches wide. For the size of the animal, they have pretty big feet.
You ever see the tail dragger?
Oh yeah, yeah. Every once in a while, you'll see a tail drag, and they will, like otters. You're familiar with them doing a slide in the snow. Every once in a while, and the same thing with other weasels. They'll slide in the snow and leave a little trough. But from my experience, they don't do that so much. Otters do it just for fun. They'll run a little bit and then slide, even on the flat. Usually I see that little furrow from fishers during mating season. So I don't know if it might be a function of scent mark or just enthusiasm. I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, and I have seen one place was in particular that stood out with the tail drag, as there was a mound. It was in the snow, and 2 fishers came together, a male and female came together. I could tell by the discrepancy in the size of prints. And they came up over that ridge together, joined, followed each other. And when they came up on that little mound, they left the mark where the tail was, their tail drag. And they don't purposely elevate their tail. And they're fairly low to the ground, so tail drag is relatively common to see like this. They have big bushy tails. That's one, when you're looking at trying to distinguish. That's a mink. Well, that's a foreign mink, so it's kind of light color. Well, that's a mink. Size-wise compared to the fisher. Mink generally are darker than that, and they could be mistaken for a female fisher because of the size. That's the size difference between a male and female fisher. So, but mink are generally aquatic. You'll find them in and around water mostly. Their snouts are shorter. Their face looks a little bit different. Fishers have a tendency to have a little bit longer snout than the other ones, than otters or mink. This is an otter, quite a bit different in size. Although at a distance, it may look very similar, but quite a bit different in size with the otter. Their tails are generally, this would be together. Their tails are long but generally narrower, whereas the fisher's tail is generally bushy. I say generally because at the end of summer, a lot of that hair is worn off, and a lot of times they have fairly narrow tails. But generally it's pretty bushy. I mean, pass the otter around to kind of. Otters are the largest muscelids or weasels that we have around here. And they are pretty much aquatic as well. They'll be around rivers, larger bodies of water. The closest population that I've observed here is over at Gate City. A couple ponds over there. Otters are pretty common. And now the fun part. Now we go to scat, because that's another important identifier. Without some size reference, it's really hard to tell with this, but generally that's classic Fisher's scat. That's classic Fisher's scat with the very long and narrow black, resulting from a meat diet, very long and thin. And often the longer ones will be folded back on themselves. So that's something to look for, is you see something long and thin, black, and then folded back on themselves like that. And I had one of my teachers had a good way of remembering that, is they have the long thin scat that's folded back on themselves because they have short legs. And that makes perfect sense. It like I say, that's classic. It can vary as far as the length. Usually shiny, maybe vary in length. We get into scent marking. Most animals scent mark one way or another. It's like leaving a calling card for the other animals, not necessarily always their own species. Other animals notice the scents that are left by different animals. Now what's happening here is, this is a classic scent marking photo. A friend of mine took this up and with his trail camera. What happened here is the fisher, this was a video that I couldn't download, but anyway, this illustrates what that fisher did is he came from the lower left corner and walked up and climbed up over the top and then dragged his butt down. And I'm sure that's painful, but he pees on it. So, and I can't detect the scent of a fisher urine. Red fox is noticeable. Bobcat's noticeable. Bobcat pee smells like you have a tomcat that sprays, where it smells like all the cats smell alike. And red fox urine kind of smells sort of like skunk, not quite as harsh, not quite as pungent, but kind of skunkish in scent. I can't tell what he leaves there, but all the other animals can. So that doesn't make any difference if I can or not. what he did here is interesting. Unfortunately, I don't have that video. But what he did is he came up, dragged his butt down, peed on that stump, and they love those kind of stumps because they're very porous and they really hold a scent for a long period of time. And it's the right height, and they all seem to have that point on them. So I don't know if that's a factor. So he pees on that, and then what he did, it's not shown here, is then he walked ahead, and then he started hopping with his hind feet. Started about 3 or 4 times. And what he was doing is those scent glands that were on his hind feet that I pointed out, he was making sure that he landed that scent. So not only did he pee, but he also left the scent from his hind feet. And the other animals will come along and inspect this. Raccoons will come along, coyotes will come along, foxes will come along, they'll check it out. Sometimes they'll pee on top of it. Like, well, I'll show you. And some of the more glamorous things that they do, they have anal gland secretions. If you have a dog, you know about that when a dog drags his butt along the ground or something like that. It's leaving scent from the anal gland. And if you have a dog, that you have to sometimes express that material from the anal gland and get it cleaned out. Well, that's what this is. I'm not totally sure when and why they leave that, but generally I think, if I remember correctly, that's a nickel. It's a very small patch of black, shiny, tarry substance that they'll leave on the ground. I don't know if it's random. I'm not sure. I haven't run across any research that really narrows that down as to when and why they do that. This other one is interesting because I have one of the things, I go out every morning out in the woods and I have a place I call my sit spot. So I'll sit quietly. It's a good location because it's at the edge of a swamp and edge of a woods and edge of a field. And a lot of animals use that. And there's a trail that goes into the swamp that a lot of animals use. So I sit there. And previous days I had noticed fisher activity in and around that area. And then I came back one day and this was planted right on my sit spot. So I'm not sure what he was trying to say. But and like I say, other animals will count a mark. Sometimes it's interesting to see. One time there was some fisher scat on a rock, and a fox had come along and laid his scat on top of it. It's like countermarking. And so you'll see sometimes one piled on top of the other. Foxes have a tendency to leave their scats on a elevated surface like a rock on top. They like to show off. Anything I've seen them, they put them on hubcaps that are laying out there. Anything that's elevated, they'll put them on top. Fishers, I'm not sure about. I don't think fishers are into that game. This other stuff. This is where a fisher had scat, and that's another example of a scat configuration. And it's kind of hard to tell here, but you can see where he backed up and deposited that. Now that's just, partially that's just defecation, but it also has a secondary purpose of scent marking as well. And this other one is, as far as I can tell, because you can't really tell here, but the male and female tracks here, and they're going around in circles. Little scat right there. I think this was the right time of year. I think this was part of their mating ritual. Or, a family that poops together, stays together or something. But that's also scent marking as well. And you can see from this that the scat is kind of clumped together, similar to that one on the other side. And, if there's a question, the tracks were clear enough to tell that, that was definitely a fisher that left that. the ulterior motive behind this is to increase people's awareness of fishers and try to keep on the lookout for a sign. No matter where you find it. Like I say, generally they don't like fields. They'll stay away from open areas as much as possible. If they do have to cross an open area, they'll go beeline, get across it as quick as possible. A lot of times when they're hunting, they will zigzag through the woods. And the term random has been applied to that, but I don't know how random it is. You know, and if they're in good habitat where there's a lot of rabbits or something like that, they'll zigzag through, and it increases their chances of coming across the rabbit. They don't hunt by pursuit. It's mostly stealth, and they're very efficient hunters. And rabbits, squirrels are an important part of their diet around here, as well as other smaller animals. But there's not that much food value in mice and voles and so forth. A rabbit has quite a bit of nutrition, and a squirrel has a good amount of nutrition for them. So it's better worth their while to concentrate on that. But they won't turn up their nose at whatever presents itself. This is a fisher that I trapped several years back when I was involved in the Connecticut bobcat project, and so the trap was sprung, and I come down there and say, well, that doesn't look anything like a bobcat. And so I did catch a couple of fishers. They were attracted to the same bait, and I caught them. And this is how they're right now. The research project that's going on right now, it'll start up again in the winter. I'm expecting to be trapping fishers this winter locally. So it's kind of it's what they call a guillotine trap. It's a wire cage, and then the gate's up. They step on the pan, and the gate drops down, and they're locked in, unharmed, not happy, but unharmed, and then they're tranquilized with they have a syringe on the end of a pole they can run in through the bars and get them in the hip, tranquilize them. And then they're brought out, and then they're weighed and measured, DNA samples taken, and collars are put on, and then they're released shortly thereafter. And then they're being tracked. And what the primary objective is, as it says here, they're trying to better understand their moving patterns and habitat selection. Where do they like to live? And how do they move through this habitat? Again, we haven't done a whole lot of research. Anybody, anywhere, haven't done a whole lot of research on fishers. They're not one of the big number one game animals. Bobcats are, and bears are certainly in the news all the time. Fishers kind of low profile, literally and figuratively. So I try to better understand what's going on with them. And what motivated this is that there was a study done, someone I know, when they went through their master's at Central Connecticut State University, and they were trapping and video trapping with a camera fishers throughout the state. And what they were coming up with is it seemed to be a decrease in the population. And except for northern central Connecticut, around here, Union, in that area, the population, actually, those populations seem to actually be on the increase. But generally in Connecticut, there seems to be a decrease in the population. And so what they're hoping from this study, it's going to take several years to start getting a handle on this. What they're hoping to do is find out, okay, if that's the case, if they are decreasing, what might be the factors behind that? And there could be all kinds of things that enter into this. Trapping could be one. they're relatively easy to trap. But last year there wasn't much of a take. I think the bag limit was like 2 per trapper, 2 per year, and they just weren't getting them. And so that flag went up with that, wondering, okay, well, why is that? There are other factors too. Loss of habitat, just like everybody else, can be a factor. Up north, the snowshoe hare go in cycles. Population peaks and then it drops off, and then lagging behind that, fisher population will do the same thing. They'll peak and drop off. So there'll be fluctuations in the population based on the prey that they're concentrating on. I don't know if that's the case here in Connecticut, but it could be. It could be a factor. Could be something to do with rabbits. Porcupines, I wouldn't think so much because we don't have all that many. Northwest part of the state, we have quite a few porcupines, and in the northern tier here in the eastern part of the state of Connecticut, we do have porcupines, but not really a main food source for fishers in the state. So the state is hoping to recruit citizen scientists. They want everybody on board with this, everybody that's interested. So if you see a fisher, that's the email address. On the handout that I gave you, there was a much more lengthy address, but because of this study, they want to make it as simple as possible. So that's the DEP Fisher sightings at CT.gov. What they'll look for is photographs would be great. That'd be ideal. You get photographs because, like I say, it's easy to confuse a fisher with a otter or a mink or something like that. But like I was saying, the fishers are generally going to be in wooded areas and away from bodies of water. They're not really fond of swimming, whereas otters are in the water all the time. Mink are in the water. Not to say that a fisher won't swim. He has to, but they generally avoid that. And they'll be usually in thicker woods. If you say you go for a walk or at Gate City or something like that, and you see one out there. They do have mink and they do have otters in Gate City, but it all depends on where you're at. So what they're looking for, photographs would be perfect. If you submit that, they would want to know when and where. And the where is usually if it's on the road, you see a fisher go trot across the road. They would like to know the intersection, Route 85 and whatever, the closest intersection. They want to narrow it down as much as possible. If you can provide GPS coordinates off your phone, that'd be great. That would be helpful. That'll narrow it right down to specific locations.
What kind of sound does it make?
What's that?
What kind of sound?
They don't scream like people suggest. That screaming, that blood-curdling scream that people hear, and for whatever reason, it's been a habit. Now it's kind of an old wives' thing. Oh, that's a fisher. No, it's probably a red fox. Red fox will make this really penetrating, screaming sound in the woods. Other animals are fairly loud too. Raccoons, if you heard raccoons, they make a lot of noise. Bobcats will, like when a female's in heat, she'll sound like a cat, but much bigger and louder. But generally what people are hearing are red fox. Fishers are pretty quiet. It's not to any predator's advantage to make a whole lot of noise. And so they're pretty quiet. They may hiss, they may growl. They have, unfortunately, I don't have a recording of it, but they also do the closest description I can give it is a chortle. kind of a funny little staccato kind of sound that they make. You wouldn't necessarily hear that unless you're right fairly close to them. It wouldn't be like, middle of the night, you hear this thing out in the woods. And generally that's, red foxes are awfully loud. And especially if they're being attacked. And if they do that blood-curdling scream, probably they are being attacked by something to emit that sound. Like I say, they're relatively quiet. Same thing like coyotes, when you hear that coyotes out howling and stuff like that, they're not hunting, because that would be counterproductive. What they're doing is trying to keep in contact with other members of their family or establishing their boundaries to other groups of coyotes. Well, when they're hunting, they're very quiet. So anyway, now roadkill fishers as well, that's a separate place that you report that. 860-424-3211 is the phone number that you would call to report. And like I mentioned to folks earlier, that if it's around here, I will probably be then called to pick up the body and take it out to Burlington, out to their office on Burlington. What they do with the roadkills, they'll do a necropsy on them and various things that they will look at. Stomach content is the main thing that they're going to be looking at. So what is their diet? What are they eating? I've had people blame the poor fisher for eating all the cats. Well, that can happen. That can happen. But all the research that I've seen of stomach content, they find very little evidence of that. So, for what it's worth, they're no more vicious than any other animal. They don't corner the market on being vicious. They will, like any weasels, they'll get into the hen house if they can. And there's been reports that are accurate that where they've killed a whole bunch of chickens, they've killed all the chickens. And that's known as the hen house syndrome. That's a hen house, a pen where the chickens are. That's an unnatural situation. That wouldn't occur out in the wild. Food is pretty scarce out in the wild, but all of a sudden, they've got 20 chickens screaming, running around. And from the research that I've read, it's not so much sound or scent, it's actually the movement. So when these chickens are running around like crazy, they go into overdrive and they start killing them all. It's not a natural thing. It wouldn't happen naturally out in the wild. But in that artificial kind of situation, it can happen. So sometimes that doesn't bode well for their reputation. But that's all weasels. We'll do the same thing. We have, the weasels that we have, the mustelids in Connecticut, we have what we call actual weasels. We have short-tail and long-tail weasels, which are then again much smaller than the mink. Maybe that long. And we have those. Those are in the same family. We have mink, fishers, otters, and actually skunks are part of that general family as well, the mustelid family. So I think I did pretty well on time here.
Yeah.
You read
Oh, maybe
why they're called fisher hats? Is there a reason behind that?
I have it.
Really?
Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, somewhere a long time ago, somebody decided to call them fisher cats. And then they stuck.
No.
They, I remember several years back, I saw something running through the woods, and at first I thought it was a house cat. They kind of roughly, when they run through quickly, they kind of look like a cat. Their legs are much shorter, they're longer, and their tail's funkier, but, moving quickly. They're not related to cats at all. And the fisher part there's a lot of questions as to where that name came from. I think the name actually originated in Europe, and it might have a French derivation. They're not sure where that name comes from. They don't fish. There is actually another animal in Asia called a fisher cat. They call it fishing cat. They do fish. I'm
And
not
it
sure
is
who
a
they're
cat?
related to. I don't think they're,
And it is a cat?
and it's a cat.
Feline.
So I don't know, there's some confusion. I like to stick with Fisher because that cat can be kind of misleading. Any other questions?
What are their predators?
What's that?
What are their predators?
How many? Bobcats have been known to kill fishes. Not so much for eating, just for the sake of killing, and I think that's more a matter of their diet overlaps, and consequently their territory overlaps, and so I think there's a sense of competition. They have been known, bobcats have been known to kill, but not necessarily eat them. There's still I wouldn't want to tangle with a fish, but I wouldn't want to tangle with a bobcat either, so.
You know, can I attract fishers to my trail cam? Is it ethical?
Or possible.
Well, you had bait in the trap that attracted.
Yeah, but that was an area that already had fishers. It's kind of tricky. If it's not typical or their range. They're around, and where you're at, they could be there. There's enough contiguous forests, and they could be in the area.
Can I show you a picture? Because I'm pretty sure I had one on my back grill the other day. I'm not kidding. So it's hard to see because it's like off of a motion camera.
Yep.
But if you can, it's on the back on my grill.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a fisher cat. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fish.
Yeah, and it did kill my cat actually. Didn't eat it, but it killed it. But so that's Notch Road Extension, and that was right outside my back door. Is there any way I can deter this thing from staying out of my
I
yard?
want to attract it, but she wants to deter.
You can have it. I'll give it to you if you want to put your trap in my yard.
You can always move to Hartford.
No, I work there.
Yeah, get together.
No, I'm serious though. Is there any way to deter these things? Because
No.
like
Bring your
that
cat
was
outside.
really close to my house, like
Yeah.
5 feet away from my
Yeah,
back door.
Yeah, he's not gonna hurt you. I mean, any animal, if you corner them, if there's no way of escape, any animal. I had a woodchuck was pretty upset at me one time because I hadn't cornered. You know, so it doesn't matter how big or how small the animal is. You know, if you corner them, they will try to defend themselves. And most any animal, I don't care whether it's a chipmunk. Chipmunks can bite pretty hard. Yeah, I don't know. That's one of the benefits or not, depending on the way you look at it, of living in the country. We have more wildlife now, more diversity of wildlife now than we had back in the 50s. When I was a kid, we had hardly any deer, no bears,
No turkeys.
hardly any. Bobcats were really non-existent. They were here, but mostly in the northwest part of the state. No fishers, no turkeys, all that. And so now within the past 30, 40 years, now we have pretty much the whole mix, which is a good thing because that suggests that somebody's doing something right. That we have the habitat that supports the diversity, and so that's a good thing. That's why the fishers were brought in initially in the northwest part of the state, is just strictly so that we have the diversity of wildlife, and hopefully that will encourage the state and other entities to support, taking care of the environment. Not clear cutting, not not developing too much. I don't know if they've had too much success with that part, but development and is the primary problem with habitat loss. And so, like I say, we have now. To me, I've traveled all over the country, all over the world to spot wildlife. Then I realized, boy, I don't have to go anywhere. We've got the whole mix right here in Connecticut. You know, right in our literally in our backyards. That we have.
We had a bobcat the year before, right at my back door too.
Yeah.
We're neighbors, so that's why they're over here like shaking their head, like literally looking in my back slider. A bobcat stayed long enough for my kid to get many pictures. It was watching Modern Family,
Yeah.
like it was. Sat in the back room and watched TV for a little while. Wasn't scared. Like I think that's like the thing that I worry about a little bit. Like my kid was awake when when the Fisher cat was out there, and it sat there long enough for the camera to capture it.
Yeah.
Which is wild to me. You would have thought that with lights on and somebody moving around that it wouldn't have sat there.
So
But
was
it
it
did.
night?
It was at night. Yeah.
They are very shy. I mean, if you went out and made a whole lot of noise, they'd take off. You know, that's about the only thing that can be done is what they call aversive training. Teach them that it's not fun to be in somebody's backyard.
Yeah.
And what that consists of a lot of times, you take a metal pot, cooking pot, and bang them together, making a lot of noise, they'll be gone. And so you repeat that as many times as necessary. The whole idea is you don't want to make them feel comfortable in your backyard. Just don't, just make a lot of noise. You see them, go out and scream and yell,
Okay.
do whatever you need to do.
Are they attracted to a grill the way a bear is?
What's that?
Would they be attracted to a grill the way a bear is?
I wouldn't doubt it. If there's food, if there's food
Barbecue.
left on that. Raccoons, I mean, all kinds of animals go after grills. If there's food residue on the grill, especially if it's cooked nicely.
I mean, there's no food on the grill. I mean, I'll send the picture in though, so that they're aware.
Yeah, do that, please. Yeah.
I was talking to a carpenter today who was doing some work on Leslie's house just up the road, and he said that I think he lives, and he mentioned Highland, Manchester Highland,
Oh,
which is
right.
Highland Park, maybe, I don't know. But he saw a couple of paws coming out of a dumpster.
Oh my god.
And,
Glastonbury. Glastonbury Highland is what he said.
okay.
Yeah. Just
He mentioned Highland, I thought several
Yes,
times.
there's
but-
one in
Okay,
Glastonbury Highland.
but anyway, he went over to look, he looked in the dumpster, and he took pictures, like he showed me on his phone. Sure looked like immature fishers, I mean, not super long as far as I could tell. It was a
Mr.
little
Diamond.
complicated, there were two of them in there, and they
Yeah.
couldn't get out.
Oh, okay.
So he took a branch and put it down, and they
Yeah.
zipped out, but they couldn't get up the side, I guess. And I was just curious, I mean, by coincidence, it was literally a few hours ago I talked to this guy.
Yeah,
about this.
that- yeah,
He
that-
showed me the pictures
Yeah, that area is adjacent to all that Manchester water.
that you mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's plenty of fishers over there.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing, from what I see over the past several years, I'm not seeing any decrease in our area. So it'll be interesting to see how the study works out.
So as it turns out, a week ago tonight, I was sitting overlooking the lake, and I saw what I thought was a cat on my patio, and then it started not acting like a cat, and then it like reached up to my table and was like snooping around, looking at stuff on the patio. I had a couple of tall chairs, did the same thing, and at that point, I mean, literally from here to there, away from me, I'm quite certain it was a fisher.
Yeah, it could be, yeah.
And the beautiful, beautiful thick tail. It was really, really a magnificent animal because, I got to see it doing its natural thing, and just the way it walked, it was really very impressive.
Yeah, they are impressive.
And it had to be a better male because it was, at least 3 feet long.
I had when I was walking down a trail, I had a young juvenile trotting across the trail in front of me, climbed the tree, and he started peeking around as he's climbing the tree, back and forth. So I'm going down the trail the next day, and I see him there was some young deer yearlings that were, looked like they were playing, which they were. But there was that young fish who was playing with them. They were just chasing each other back and forth, back and forth. He couldn't do any damage, and they were just having fun. But they all like to play.
Do we have cameras on sections of rails to trails to see if that's where they're coming from at all? Because that's like a big wooded area, like the rails to trails.
That's a really nice corridor. A lot of animals use that for travel because it's a good portion of it. It's not huge expanses of forest on the other side, but it's a nice corridor. And it's kind of interesting in the winter to go down there because you can see some pretty cool tracks on the rails to trails down there, especially after somebody's gone through with a snowmobile or cross-country skis or the snow's packed down. Because the animals like to use something that's already packed down. Same thing, fishers will do that. They don't like to break trail if they don't have to. If somebody else breaks the trail, whether it's snowmobile or whatever, that's fine, they'll use it. Deer will use it. Everybody else will use that same trail. So that's kind of a nice place to see different animal activities down there. But they will use that as a travel corridor.
Do we have cameras on it though? Like if they're trying to track these guys?
Not that I know of.
No.
How are we doing on time?
Good.
Good.
Quarter of.
One last question. Have you ever heard of, I was talking to an old guy about kind of our backwoods up in Brunswick, Maine, years ago. And he said, if you ever hear anything crying like a baby left out in the woods, it's that, I think it's that screaming red fox thing you were talking about. Maybe he said that's a Lucifer. And of course that got my attention because I went, what the heck is a Lucifer? And as far as I thought he was, by the end of talking to him, I thought it must have been a Fisher cat. But I just was curious if you'd ever heard that term for any wildlife.
I have applied to fishers.
Okay.
YouTube is filled with videos purporting to be proof they had a Fisher cat in their backyard, and you hear the screaming, and the video is completely black, and they still swear it's proof.
Yeah, I mean, my own experiences and those of biologists that I work with, they don't have any concrete evidence that they scream like that. Red foxes, plenty.
Yeah.
So when you see something on the internet where it's all black and say, "Oh, listen to the fisher," well, yeah.
I've heard rabbits sound like a baby.
What's that?
Rabbits.
Yes, there's many.
Oh, rabbits too.
Yeah.
Yeah, rabbit will make a lot of noise if something snags them.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So are
A lot of animals, if they're captured by a predator, they will
Scream.
scream blood.
when you get enough reports, do you get like a hot spot? Are we able to see like where the most activity is, like the most sightings? And is that where you guys are gonna like set up traps and try to track more? So it's not like double sighting or we're all looking at the same fisher. Or it's not like 12 fishers, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
How do we tell if what we're
Well,
finding out, the data?
and initially, we've got several things going on. We've got trail cameras out there, and they will help determine the traffic of different species. And a lot of it is just by chance. Set the traps out, and see what you catch. And if you get a good number of a particular species, then yeah, you definitely want to put cameras out in those locations. Well, it kind of goes hand in hand, a couple of different methods to determine where they are. Big part too is reports from the public too. If you get in an area where people have a good number of sightings, and that's something they want to look into. Let's see. Okay. Well, let's see what we can do. A lot of kids now going to school getting their graduate degrees. They're using in wildlife are using cameras. Now, if we didn't have these, they're a wonderful invention because you kind of tell what population densities might be more or less, in different areas. Yeah. And that's where citizen scientists like people like yourselves come in handy, because given those reports, say, oh, wow, look at a lot of sightings in one particular area.
Yeah.
So they want to focus on that to see, get a little bit more evidence.